Monday mornings were always the same for Alex. He'd wake up early, make himself a strong cup of coffee, and sit by the window of his small apartment, watching the sun rise over the city. The world seemed to wake up with him, slowly stirring to life as the city began to hum with its usual rhythm. But this Monday was different. As Alex sipped his coffee, he noticed his wife, Sophie, standing by the door, her coat draped over her arm. She was fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve, her eyes avoiding his gaze. "Alex, we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex set his mug down and glanced at her, his heart already beginning to race. "Sure, what's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. He wasn't sure why, but he had a feeling this conversation was going to be one he wouldn't forget. I think it's time we end things." Sophie's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick and suffocating. Alex blinked, unable to immediately process what she had just said. "What?" he asked, his voice a little more strained now. Sophie took a deep breath, as though trying to gather the courage to say the words. "I've been seeing someone else. I'm in love with him, Alex. I want a divorce." Alex didn't move. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He simply stared at her, his mind working furiously to process the shock. His hands, though, were trembling slightly as he folded the morning newspaper he had been reading. "So that's it? Just like that?" Alex asked, his voice eerily calm. "You're just going to walk away from everything we've built?" Sophie's eyes filled with tears as she struggled to find the right words. "I didn't want this. I really didn't. But I don't feel anything for you anymore, Alex. It's like I've been living with a stranger for the past year." Alex felt his heart tighten, but he refused to let it show. He knew better than to show weakness. "So, you found someone else? Does he make you feel alive again, Sophie?" He didn't mean to say it with that sharpness, but the bitterness was there. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Sophie nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm sorry, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you." Alex stood up abruptly, pacing the floor for a moment. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Sophie. I knew something was off, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that the woman I married could betray me like this." Sophie choked back a sob, but Alex didn't let up. His voice dropped, cold and distant. "You don't have to explain yourself to me. I don't need to hear about your reasons or excuses. If you've already made up your mind, then it's over." Sophie looked at him, shocked by the lack of emotion in his voice. She expected anger, perhaps even shouting, but instead, Alex seemed detached, almost as if he had already let go. "Do you have any idea how long I've known?" Alex asked suddenly, turning to face her. He caught her gaze, his expression calm but piercing. "How long I've been aware of what was happening? I wasn't blind, Sophie." Sophie froze, her face paling. "What do you mean? You knew?" Her voice cracked, a mixture of disbelief and guilt flooding her system. Alex nodded slowly. "Of course I knew. I knew before you even started hiding your phone, before the late nights and the suspicious messages. It's not hard to figure out when your wife starts acting distant. But I wasn't going to confront you until I had all the facts. I wanted to see just how far you'd go." Sophie's hands trembled. "Alex, I never meant for this to happen." "I'm sure you didn't," Alex interrupted, his voice still eerily calm. "But it did, didn't it?" Sophie bit her lip, unable to speak. Alex's next words hit her like a punch to the gut. "You want a divorce?" "Fine," he said, his voice now laced with a cold finality. "But don't expect to get away with anything. This house, our savings, everything we've worked for, consider it all mine now." The silence between them was deafening. Sophie didn't know how to react. She had expected anger, perhaps even some kind of confrontation, but Alex was so controlled, so distant. It made her heart ache. "Alex, please," Sophie whispered, but her words fell on deaf ears. He had already made up his mind. Sophie sank into a chair, feeling as though the ground had been pulled from beneath her. She didn't know what to do next, didn't know how to fix the mess she had created. Meanwhile, Alex's mind was already working on his next steps. He had prepared for this moment, and now that it was here, he would ensure that Sophie would learn the full consequences of her actions. Alex's decision to wait before confronting Sophie wasn't an accident. It wasn't out of fear or uncertainty. No, he had known something was off long before he could put all the pieces together. He had suspected for months, watching her distant behavior and the way she became increasingly secretive. The late-night phone calls, the sudden business trips, the hours she spent on her phone with Darren, his suspicions had only grown stronger with each passing day. It wasn't until he caught Sophie slipping out of their apartment one evening, dressed in a way that made her look like someone else entirely, that he had his confirmation. That was the moment he had decided to take control. Instead of confronting her then, Alex chose to take a more methodical approach. He hired a private investigator, someone who would gather the evidence he needed to take charge of the situation. Weeks passed, and with each report, Alex's suspicions were confirmed. The investigator had captured photos of Sophie and Darren together at hotels, had obtained messages between them that spoke of a relationship far beyond what Sophie was willing to admit. When the evidence was finally in his hands, Alex did nothing at first. He waited. Sophie would eventually come to him, and when she did, he would be ready. He had no intention of letting her destroy his life with her lies. "Why didn't you say anything?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling as she looked at Alex. "I didn't want to make a scene," Alex replied. "You were already making a mess of things. I just let you dig your own grave." Sophie's eyes welled up with tears, but Alex didn't feel any sympathy. "Don't cry now, Sophie. It's too late for that." She wiped her tears away, looking at him with pleading eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she whispered. "I thought we had lost something, that spark, but Darren made me feel something again." Alex clenched his jaw, a bitter laugh escaping him. "The spark? You're using that as an excuse?" He stepped closer, his voice darkening. "Instead of talking to me, you went behind my back. And now you want sympathy?" Sophie tried to say something, but her words were lost. She had no justification, no way to explain her actions, not when Alex had already seen through her lies. Alex's next steps were swift and calculated. He left the apartment, as though leaving Sophie to wallow in her guilt, and headed straight for the bank. He closed their joint accounts, transferring the money into a new account. Then, he canceled all their credit cards. Every trace of their shared life was severed. As he returned home, Alex contacted his lawyer, Mark, and told him to start drafting the divorce papers. He was going to make sure Sophie paid for everything, emotionally, financially, and professionally. He had all the evidence he needed to destroy her. The next day, Sophie returned to their apartment to find the locks changed. A note was taped to the door. "Your belongings are in the garage. The keys no longer work. Contact Mark for the next steps." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. "Alex," she called, knocking on the door. "What is this? You can't do this to me." Alex opened the door slowly, his face unreadable. "Actually, I can," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "This is my house now, Sophie. You're no longer welcome here." Sophie's mouth dropped open in shock and disbelief. "You're cruel, Alex," she sobbed. "Cruel?" Alex's voice turned bitter. "The only thing cruel here is your betrayal. You've made your bed, Sophie. Now you'll have to lie in it." Meanwhile, Darren received his own wake-up call. Alex had sent an anonymous package to his company, filled with all the evidence of his affair with Sophie. The fallout was swift. Darren was called into a meeting with HR and suspended pending an investigation. As for Sophie, her reputation was destroyed. Friends, family, even her colleagues distanced themselves from her. The web of lies she had built over the years began to unravel, and she found herself standing alone. Her parents were the last to stand by her, but even they couldn't defend her actions. Sophie's mother called her one evening, her voice filled with disappointment. "How could you do this to Alex?" she asked. "He was always there for you." Sophie tried to explain, but there was no defending her behavior. The walls were closing in on her, and she realized too late the price she would pay for her infidelity. As the dust settled, Alex found solace in the company of his colleague, Claire. She had always been there for him, offering a shoulder to lean on when things seemed bleak. Slowly, their friendship blossomed into something more. One evening, as they sat together after a long day, Alex felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "You're incredible, Claire," he said, his heart opening up to her. Claire smiled softly. "You're not so bad yourself," she replied. But despite the growing bond between them, Alex knew his past wasn't finished with him yet. There was still much to do, and as he prepared for the upcoming divorce hearing, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie wasn't done yet. The days following Alex's final confrontation with Sophie were a blur of cold, calculated decisions. His resolve remained firm, unmoved by any lingering traces of affection or guilt that might have existed for the woman he once loved. He had long accepted the fact that Sophie was not the person he thought she was, and now it was his turn to exact retribution. He wasn't driven by malice, but by the need to reclaim what was rightfully his, and he intended to make her understand the full extent of her betrayal. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Alex had already planned everything down to the smallest detail. The private investigator's evidence was meticulously organized, and he made sure every shred of it was handed over to his lawyer, Mark, who had an airtight case prepared in record time. Sophie's affair with Darren was undeniable, and Alex was determined to make sure it wasn't just a betrayal of their marriage, but of every moral boundary they had once shared. To further tighten his grip on the situation, Alex contacted every one of Sophie's closest friends and relatives. The narrative was simple. Sophie had betrayed him with her boss, Darren, and she had been the one to destroy their family. Alex didn't need to provide all the evidence. All he needed was the truth. And the truth, in the eyes of those who once supported Sophie, was a punch to the gut they were not prepared for. Friends who had once rallied around Sophie began to avoid her. Her family, who had always seen her as the golden child, found themselves grappling with the fallout. Sophie's mother was particularly harsh in her condemnation. "I raised you better than this, Sophie. I never thought I'd see the day when you'd betray someone who stood by you." The true extent of Alex's revenge, however, wasn't just in the emotional and social destruction he had wrought. It was in the calculated destruction of Sophie's career. Alex had already sent the evidence of the affair to Darren's company. Within days, Darren was placed on leave, a suspension that turned into an eventual dismissal when the full extent of his inappropriate behavior came to light. But that was only the beginning. Using the same evidence, Alex had crafted an anonymous email to Sophie's employer, carefully outlining her affair with Darren and the ways it had compromised her professional integrity. Alex didn't even need to be cruel about it. He simply let the facts speak for themselves. The result was swift. Sophie was called into a meeting with HR the very next morning, where the evidence was presented in all its damning detail. Sophie's face drained of color as she tried to deny the accusations, but it was futile. Her once promising career, which she had worked so hard for, came to a crashing halt. Within days, Sophie was fired for violating the company's code of conduct, her name forever tainted by the affair. As she walked out of the HR office, the weight of her world collapsing around her, Sophie realized just how far Alex had taken his revenge. He had not only destroyed her marriage, but had ensured that no one would ever see her the same way again. The shame was unbearable. But Alex wasn't done yet. Sophie had destroyed their marriage, but in doing so, she had unknowingly triggered the destruction of everything she had worked for. And Alex wasn't about to let her off easy. If she thought the emotional and social fallout was enough, she was wrong. On the day the divorce was finalized, Alex made one last move. He had already secured the house and all their shared assets. But now, it was time to take his revenge to its final stage. As Sophie sat at her lawyer's office waiting for the final documents to be signed, Alex arrived unannounced, carrying a package with him. He placed it on her desk with a soft, deliberate thud. Sophie glanced up at him, confusion evident on her face. "What's this?" she asked, her voice a mixture of dread and disbelief. Alex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave her one last piercing look. "Open it," he said, his voice low and steady. Sophie hesitated, then slowly untied the string holding the package together. Inside, she found a folder filled with copies of all the evidence Alex had gathered over the past few months. Photos, text messages, even video clips that documented every moment of her affair with Darren. But that wasn't all. There was a handwritten note from Alex, sealed inside an envelope, addressed to her in bold, angry script. "Sophie, this is the legacy you chose. Remember it well. You've ruined everything, and now you'll live with the consequences. You'll never be able to hide from this. Not from me. Not from anyone." Sophie's hands trembled as she read the note, her face turning pale as the full weight of Alex's revenge hit her. The man who had once loved her, who had shared his life with her, had made sure that she would never escape the consequences of her actions. And worse, he had made sure that every person in her life would know exactly what she had done. Later that day, Alex made one final, subtle move to cement his victory. He made a call to the media outlet where Sophie had once dreamed of becoming a journalist. With the press still reeling from the scandal surrounding her affair with Darren, Alex used his newfound leverage to leak the story. Sophie's face, her name, her career, everything, was plastered across the media. There would be no escaping it. No matter where she went, people would remember her as the woman who had destroyed her own life. The news broke, and the fallout was immediate. Sophie's reputation, what little was left of it, was completely obliterated. The public, once enamored with her charm and intelligence, now viewed her with disdain. Her friends, once loyal to her side, now felt betrayed by her actions. And Darren, who had once been her escape from a loveless marriage, was long gone, leaving Sophie to deal with the consequences alone. She couldn't run from it. The damage was done. As for Alex, he felt no satisfaction in Sophie's misery. Revenge had never been his goal. He hadn't done this for the pleasure of watching her suffer. He had done it to reclaim his life, to take back what she had stolen from him. His marriage was over, but now he was free. In the weeks that followed, Alex began to rebuild his life. With Sophie out of the picture, he found a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Claire, his colleague, remained by his side. Their friendship, which had deepened over the past few months, blossomed into something more. Claire was there when Alex needed her most, and slowly, they began to build a future together. One evening, as they sat on the porch of Alex's newly purchased home, watching the sunset together, Claire turned to him. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked softly, her voice filled with quiet curiosity. Alex thought for a moment, his gaze focused on the horizon. "Not anymore," he said, his tone steady and final. "She's just a chapter in a book I've already finished." Claire smiled, her hand slipping into his. Together they watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, marking the end of one story and the beginning of another. Years passed, and life moved forward for Alex. He and Claire built a life together, one that was free from the shadow of Sophie's betrayal. Sophie, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of her broken life. Her attempts to salvage her career were met with failure, her reputation forever tarnished. Alex had won, but not because he had sought revenge. He had won because he had chosen to rise above it all, and in doing so he had reclaimed his dignity, his peace, and, ultimately, his future.